Yeah, I'm Natalia from BC Sustainability Connection. Just wanted to make a quick remark about what the whole idea behind our project was. It's to bring together people who are involved in different aspects of the big sustainability network at UBC. Because the campus is 45,000 people, and honestly, I haven't heard of the majority of these sustainability initiatives until I started this project. So the whole idea behind us was just to bring people like you together in one room and reach a sort of consensus on what sustainability means to you on campus as a student, or as a person. So yeah, we're really pleased to offer you a chance to connect. But the following workshops are about how to get people to connect with the message that you're sending out. So today, as our first speaker, we have Dr. George Hoberg, and he specializes in environmental and natural resource policy and governance. His Bachelor of Science is from UC Berkeley, PhD from MIT. He's a political scientist by training, and he taught public policy and American politics at UBC for 13 years before he joined the Faculty of Forestry full-time in 2001. His research interests zero in on design of policies and institutions to promote sustainability. His current research is focused on BC electricity policy and environmental governance of the oil sands. He has written books on BC forest policy and environmental policy in the US, toxic substances regulation, and edited 2 books on comparative Canada-US policies and the US and political Canada. So without further ado, here's George Hoberg.
Hi. What was the last part of your 4 things? Taking meaningful action or positive?
Acting for positive change.
Acting for positive change. What does that mean? And it can mean different things to different people. I'm going to talk about what, as a political scientist concerned about sustainability and especially climate, it means to me. And I guess I wanted to start by talking about how proud I am to be a faculty member at UBC that has taken such extraordinary leadership on sustainability. I mean, it's quite remarkable what the high-level university leadership commitment has been to sustainability, and in part it's reflected in this building. But I also think that well, what am I trying to say? If everyone, every institution in North America and around the world had the same commitment to sustainability, things would be great. We wouldn't have the problems that we do. But the fact is, other institutions are not. And what I see a lot of campus sustainability efforts focused on is trying to improve the sustainability of what we're doing here at UBC. And that's extremely important. But it's also just the first step. We need to spread that idea out into the broader world. How do I? There. So what we're trying to do, okay. What's going on? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with this machine, and something.
Is it not showing?
It's not showing. Sorry about this. I shouldn't have used PowerPoint with such a small group. What I'm doing with a group of students, some of whom are in the room, and by the time you leave, the rest of you will be joining us. Okay, so that is, we formed a group called UBC C350. We used to be UBC 350, but part of the funny thing is, when you're doing what we're trying to do, which is actually get political in the broader community outside of BC, you can't use the name UBC. So we're actually the UBC community for 350, 350 being the International Climate Action Group founded by Bill McKibben. And our basic point of view, our values, are that we believe there's a climate crisis. We believe, very importantly, that we have a moral obligation to address it, and I'll talk more about that near the end. We believe that solutions are feasible and affordable, but that they are costly. And the fact that they're costly which is a very important fact, by the way. Going around and convincing people that we can achieve this transition and everything will be easy is not productive. It actually will be a challenge, but it's a challenge that is both doable and absolutely necessary. And because it's costly, it requires new policy, and politicians make policy, and they don't like to impose costs. So that's the main reason that we're stuck. And the way to unstick that is through mass mobilization, convincing politicians that we want them to act on these issues. And finally, and one of the things I'll talk about, I'll kind of go through all these in more detail, is that I think because I recognize the importance of mass mobilization and a much larger, broader, stronger social movement, the question is how we get there. We're making progress, but we need to ramp it up by a factor of 100 to 1,000. And I actually think universities are great places to act as nodes or catalysts for social movement organization because of their particular structure and the kinds of people that are there. I'm not going to talk about this slide saying there's a climate crisis. I think everyone understands that. I do think that, again, one of the barriers is people's concerns about whether or not it's the efficacy issue. Is there any hope? Can we actually make a difference? And I think that we can. We are, because of these extraordinary inertia in the climate system, we are stuck with global warming, and global warming that may actually be dangerous. But even if that's true, if we still dramatically transform the energy system, which we need to do, it will be much better than it would be otherwise for future generations. Okay, we're probably already going to be experiencing 1.5 or 2 degree climate change just with the carbon we've already emitted. But is that a reason to not act and just continue to party on? Absolutely not, because it will be much more dangerous if we don't act now. So one of the basic tenets here is that the transition is feasible and affordable. And to talk about that, I want to just mention some of the work by energy scholars who look at this stuff. This is a very prominent report by 2 University of California profs. This guy's at Jacobson is at Stanford. This one's at University of California, Davis. Oh, did I say University of California? At Stanford. If you were from there, which I am, you would know that you don't say that. They're bitter rivals, actually. But the people who study the engineering and the technology think that it's feasible to produce all the energy that we need on the planet with wind, water, and solar, without fossil fuels, without nuclear. I don't know whether that's possible. I actually think we'll probably need some nuclear, but I hope we don't. And they see that it's possible to produce all new energy by 2030 and the entire system by 2050. And so it gives us reason to believe that the transformation is feasible. It's affordable. That's my next slide. The other thing about the feasibility is we feel like we have a good understanding of the policy tools needed. We believe that if we have an economy-wide carbon tax or cap and trade, a significant investment in research and development, these changes will come about. The problem is that we're just not seeing those changes because of the political resistance. What are the costs? And when I say it's affordable, I mean it's not going to necessarily fundamentally change our standard of living. There will be a cost. The economists who look at this stuff suggest a range of about 2 to 3% of GDP. That's actually a lot of money. But it's not something that is fundamentally transformative in the structure of our system. Here's some ways to think about what it costs in context. And when I look at these numbers and I think about the magnitude of the problem and the imperative, it's kind of shameful that we don't act, especially when you look at this last one. A really good year of economic growth is 4 to 5%. A crappy year is 2%, and a recession is 0 or less. So those differences in what we go through in a year for, we have to think about this in global terms, but for 1 year, if we took that difference and invested it in transforming the energy system, we could do it. From that perspective, it definitely seems affordable. So I already talked about some of this. The main obstacle is political. We need to have significant new policies. Policies are made by politicians who are mostly concerned about elections. They want to claim credit for good things, and then they want to avoid blame for bad. And the key thing here is that in order to push this transition, we need to have increased energy prices. And you can see, just watching the way the media and we and politicians behave, whenever energy prices go up, there's this strong backlash. People want government action to reduce the price of gas. Over the past 6 or 9 months in BC, we've seen this extraordinary political shift around the price of hydro rates. We have some of the cheapest hydro rates in the world. They were going to go up by 50%, and the government stepped in to cut that way back. And it was considered this big, major political issue. I've been trying to make the case that, well, we actually need to have those prices go up in order to foster this transition. And we know politicians aren't going to want to do that unless they're forced to, unless people demand it. And you actually talk to thoughtful politicians. A lot of people hate Gordon Campbell. Is anyone here a Gordon Campbell lover? I don't know whether there are that many around still. But he was a very smart man, and he actually came to understand the climate crisis, and he moved ahead with some pretty aggressive policies. But by the time he was disgracefully ushered out of office, they knew, his government and people around him, you couldn't push things further without additional public demand for that. And even conservative politicians, you want me to act? Tell me to act. Give me an electoral incentive to act. So we need to do that. And the question is why we don't do that. And that really has to do with the structure of the problem. Climate change as a policy problem is extraordinarily difficult because of the separation of the costs of action, which I'm calling mitigation here, and the benefits of action. Those are separated in temporal terms, in spatial terms, and there also is a significant amount of uncertainty. So in terms of spatial, when we think about the costs, we feel them in particular locations, like at the gas pump or at the power plant. Those things have to be paid at a particular location, but the benefits, because of the nature of the problem, where a emission of carbon dioxide in one place has a global impact, that those benefits of reducing them are felt globally. And so that really creates a significant separation of incentives. Though we also feel the costs right now. We have to act now to pay, but because of the inertia in the climate system, those benefits won't show up for a very long time. We also are, because of the tangible nature of putting pollution control in place or changing a technology, the costs of it are relatively certain, but the benefits, because they're so far in the future and because it's very hard to predict how the atmospheric system will respond, are very uncertain. So in other words, what that means is a safe climate is a public good. And what we mean by that is that, by the way, how many people here have taken more than one course in economics? Good. The rest of you should. A lot of people committed to sustainability think that economics is the problem. And I would say the desire for people to maximize short-term material gain is absolutely the problem. But you need to understand economics in order to be able to address the sustainability problem, even from a political perspective. So a really big concept out of economics is this idea of public good, where one person's consumption doesn't take away from another's, and it's impractical to exclude anybody. So that's what a safe climate or clean air is like. Situations like that promote free riders. So at an individual level, people want somebody else to do it. They want someone else to take action or to solve the problem. And they believe that their own little contribution, whether you're going to drive your car today instead of get on transit, doesn't make a big difference. So it's no big deal. You can also see that at the global level. An example I always use is about the diplomacy around climate, where Canada won't act because the United States won't act. The United States won't act because China won't act. And China won't act because the United States won't act. It's like a bunch of kids arguing over something, but the fate of the planet is actually at stake. And you can see that in the structure of that kind of situation, if you don't have that external global force coming in, it's really hard to take action. And I'm sorry, I'm going to digress for a minute, but do any of you watch Jon Stewart, The Daily Show? The most important source of social criticism in the US at least. He was doing a thing, I think it was either Tuesday or Wednesday night, about the Iran-Israel US situation. Did anyone see that? And he's trying to talk to the people of Iran at the same time he's trying to talk to the people of Israel, and at the same time he's trying to talk to the American voters. And so he keeps switching cameras like this. And all of a sudden he goes like this, and there's the God cam. So he realizes he actually has to talk to God. And I'm not suggesting there's a religious solution here, but the fact that we don't have a God globally, or a world authority to just impose a solution, means that we're stuck in these traps. And it basically means that the few can triumph over the many. And that's a result of this thing that we call the logic of collective action, which, if you want to know why we're stuck politically, it really helps explain things. And to go over this, I'll just do this quite quickly, but you can see with these simple little diagrams, if we have a democracy and we're voting, and you have 49 people here and 4 against, it's pretty obvious the 49 win, unless voter suppression tactics are very effective. If we're thinking about this in terms of net benefits, everyone has the same amount, it's still a slam dunk. Okay? 49,000 versus 4,000. But if you look at it in terms of when people have different different intensity of preferences, so the more numerous people have smaller intensity, and the fewer people have a larger intensity. This is the basic structure of the energy problem. These are the fossil fuel companies, and these are us, although the numbers would be lower here and the numbers higher there. Who would organize more effectively? The small number of people with intense preferences, right? So which side is more likely to organize effectively? You can see how, despite the fact that this is actually, I forgot to update this, that number's wrong. 4 times 10 is 4,000, isn't it? 40,000? I should really, I made that thing about economics. Math is also important. Never mind. When I say these things, it's like talking to my children, of course, who are teenagers. I tell them what they should be doing to grow up and be effective in the world, because it's the mistakes that I made. One of them, obviously, was the ability to use a calculator. So anyway, the challenge of collective action is really that when you have this differential intensity of preferences, it can lead one side to organize far more effectively. And that's basically the structure of the situation we have now, where the different intensity of preferences means that the defenders of the status quo can organize much more effectively than opponents. And so back to this slide, which is that the transition to clean energy is feasible and affordable, but it requires politicians to raise energy prices, and that is improbable without intense social pressure. And that's where I come to this idea of a leap of faith. And what I mean by that is that if we follow everyone's material short-term interest, we're not going to solve the problem. And so much of why we're stuck is because we keep thinking there's a way for that to happen. Keep thinking if you can slightly change people's incentive or slightly change the way we make the argument, then people might change their mind. We need to shift the basis for thinking about it and acting on it from thinking about people's self-interest to thinking about a moral obligation. And that's hard because people don't act on moral obligations, do they? Well, of course they do. They do it all the time. But you have to make different kinds of appeals. And in order to make action happen, you can't just sit around as professors in a classroom talking about the imperative of the climate crisis. You have to actually organize groups to go out into the political process and make a difference. And you can see that from history, and for those people who saw our talks last night, these are the same set of images, but it's the same idea. People getting together and acting can change the world, and they have. They did in the civil rights movement in the United States. They did in many countries through the Arab uprising, Arab Spring last year. It's actually quite extraordinary when you think about that. Common people, desperately poor people, as individuals, got the message and they went out at the risk of their lives, right? It wasn't like it might be embarrassing knocking on someone's door. They actually risked their lives, and they still are in Syria, to make changes to move from an authoritarian system to a democratic system. And so that's absolutely extraordinary. Locally, in British Columbia, we have a long tradition of civil disobedience and protests that have brought about actions in Clayoquot Sound in the early 1990s. A concerted social movement with a lot of dedicated people significantly increased the amount of old growth forest protected in that precious area. And in energy politics on tar sands pipelines, we can see that people acting together can also make a difference. It happened in the US just recently with the Keystone XL pipeline, when 350.org and other organizations banded together and managed to put off and potentially actually cancel a very significant pipeline. And so what we're trying to do at UBC's 350 is get together faculty, students, and staff and commit to advocating for policy change. And so that's why it's important to get out beyond UBC. UBC is doing extraordinary things, but if we don't change the broader politics in British Columbia and in Canada, we're not going to accomplish the changes that we need. And we have an organizational philosophy and approach where we think that social media is important. It's an extremely important tool for communication, and those people who know me know that I'm pretty addicted to Twitter and other things. I certainly use it a lot, and we have an extraordinary case, this Invisible Children video that is storming the world at the moment, which I've actually yet to see, but I hear it's very powerful, and it certainly is making a big difference. It shows that social media can matter, but it has inherent limits in building the types of personal and social ties that have power to actually transform things, except in some extraordinary circumstances. So we believe that face-to-face organizing is the way to go. It gives you meaning. In fact, it makes being part of an organization a lot of fun and makes you feel like you're contributing and a part of something bigger, but it also gives you power. What politicians notice, and that's what you really need to do, right? You need to convince politicians that you are willing to act at the voting booth on climate and other sustainability issues. If politicians don't think that, they'll continue to ignore you. And that includes the demand that you'll have to pay more for energy. If politicians don't see that that's what you want, they will continue to ignore you. So what we're doing, particularly, we're lucky at UBC in that the most powerful politician in British Columbia, which is the staging ground for a significant amount of carbon exports from these oil sands pipelines, through coal and through the new proposals to dramatically increase the export of natural gas through these LNG facilities. These exports are overwhelming the reductions in greenhouse gas emissions that BC policy has brought about and is trying to bring about in the coming decades. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go out into the Vancouver Point Grey riding, which is Christy Clark's riding, and we're going to spread information about these carbon exports, which we think will be pretty shocking to a lot of people. Did you know that existing and planned carbon exports from British Columbia are 7 times the amount that we currently emit in British Columbia? It's absolutely stunning to think about that relationship. 7 times. If all the coal mines and all of the LNG facilities get pushed out, we will become a major carbon pipeline for the world. And so what we're going to do is we're going to meet. We're not trying to narrow down our site, but it's probably going to be at the gymnasium at Kitts High at 9 o'clock in the morning on March 31st. And we're going to get an hour of training that day from some good people who are very familiar with political canvassing. And then for a couple hours, we're going to go door to door in teams of 2. One person will be making the pitch to the people at the door. It'll be a very brief pitch, 30 seconds or a minute or so. And the other person will have a clipboard where you're taking notes about how interested or sympathetic the people at the door are. And after the 2 or 2.5 hours of canvassing, we'll gather back up at around 2 at the Kitts Community Center, and then we will march or cycle down to Christy Clark's office, her constituency office, which is at 4th and Alma, and we will deliver the petitions to her in person. And if we're successful, we'll actually get a meeting with her. So that's our plan for this term. We're going to continue next year with other similar sorts of political actions, but it's just one model for how to take these ideas for sustainability that universities are championing and take them out into the community. So thank you very much.
I have a separate question though.
Go ahead, please.
I think in terms of kind of the theme around this conference of connecting different groups and working together around some of these issues, I'm curious maybe what your thoughts are on obviously demanding that politicians create energy system changes and raise energy prices, but what about suggestions around cooperating the left parties and grouping together voters that way, some of those different kind of electoral strategies, looking at reform in that regard as opposed to simply just advocating for energy.
Okay, so I'm talking, I'm giving you my own personal views, not because we haven't discussed this as an organization and I don't think we're going to get involved in the electoral reform issue, but my views are that Canada will be doomed to Harper government or similar majorities indefinitely unless the center-left parties learn to cooperate. And it's arguably the highest priority for people committed to sustainability and climate action. It's urgent. And one of the things, the advantages of our strategy is that this riding overlaps with the federal riding of Vancouver Quadra, which is held by Joyce Murray, who won by a handful of votes and is a very competitive riding federally. And so we're not just communicating to Christy Clark and the provincial political parties, we're communicating to the federal parties as well. Part of what we're doing here is we want to show that we know what we're doing. We have a map that prioritizes things, and that there is a potent new political force. It's UBC students and faculty, but also young people from across the city. We're also working with other groups like Kids for Climate Action to do this, because one of the things that's going on is politicians are convinced people don't care very much about the environment. They're convinced that youth don't vote. And you know what? Youth don't vote. And it's absolutely terrible. And we need to find a way to change that. And the way to change that is to get people excited about the political process and get them to believe that they can make a difference. So that this sort of face-to-face campaign effort is also oriented to that. We want to kind of send a signal that youth are rising up and demanding action on this sort of thing. And how that, I don't know exactly what to do about the party thing, but anything that you can do to get Liberals, Greens, and NDP to work together at the federal level is the highest priority. One of the NDP candidates for federal office, Nathan Cullen, the only one from BC, is very strongly committed to this, and showing interest in his campaign is a way to suggest that interest. I'm not backing an individual candidate, I'm just saying that it is a very, very high priority, and that's one opportunity to have it expressed. Also, but Lead Now is a group that is very big on this, and they could use your support as well. Yes.
I was just wondering, like, I don't know, do you think that, like, people actually, like, it sounds sort of like want this change? Because I remember when the carbon tax was introduced, there was, like, this huge backlash. I remember my parents were like, oh yeah, we're not going to vote for the Liberals because they're going to impose a carbon tax. And it's like, you know, we talk about wanting the government to do all these things. We want them to, you know, come up with climate change strategies for us. We want them to come up with policies. But when they do, we're just like, what are you doing? You know? So, I don't know. I think that a lot of it is like an individual kind of mindset. And that's what kids' political parties have had. Like you said, they don't want to do anything that they think we don't want. So,
right.
Do
you want it?
I know I want it. I know that I would.
So do your parents want it? I'm sorry, I don't want to put you on the spot personally.
Totally.
Okay.
I don't
So-
think people want to pay for it. At the end of the day, like, that's what.
You're right. People don't want to pay higher costs, higher prices when they don't need to otherwise. So let me, it's a broader set of conversations here. What is the main obstacle to climate action? Is it that people don't understand how big the problem is? Do you think that's what the issue is? I actually don't. I think most people understand, they get that there is a climate crisis, that if we don't significantly change, there will be hell to pay in future decades. Would you agree with that general statement? That even the people who don't want to pay more money for the carbon tax believe that? What is the case is that the factual views that people have in their head are driven in very big ways by their values, right? And so if you are of a conservative ideology and you don't generally like to see the government play a bigger role in society, then you develop reasons to ignore or downplay the climate crisis. And that's a huge barrier. It's especially big in the United States, where they twist themselves into contortions about this stuff, and thoughtful, intelligent people lie about it on a daily basis in Republican presidential campaigns. How do you change that? Well, my own personal view is the most important way to change that is for youth to rise up and demand that it be changed, because these old farts are squandering opportunities to help your future. And even those conservative folks who are strongly opposed to climate action, that most of them have children and grandchildren. And their own selfish short-term material interests, it's hard to overcome that, but if you get them to think about the future they're creating for their children and grandchildren, it's possible to motivate their change. Only though if the idea gets out there. if thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of young people get active in the political process and talk about this our future, and you need to act for our future, I think it can make an enormous difference.
As a kind of follow-up to that, do you think though that those kind of emotive appeals of saying to politicians, it's your children that you're hurting, your grandchildren that you're hurting? Because I think, I mean, I've had friends that have met with politicians, I've sent that same message to politicians and kind of had this blank look kind of go over their faces of, it's almost too scary of a concept to present to someone, that you're essentially saying you're dooming your grandchildren. Oh God, I don't know how to react to that, you know?
It is a very challenging thing to say in public to people, because you're questioning their loyalty at the most fundamental things. But think about why that is. It's actually because it taps into such an incredibly strong value. I wouldn't actually recommend shaming people like that in public, but making the argument to them personally, or getting together and making the argument in big public ways. You don't personalize it to that individual politician necessarily, but you appeal to the sense that you do it because it's the right thing to do. You think about it like Hitler, like fighting Hitler or fighting slavery. It's not something that you question whether or not the cost benefits work out for you. It's you do it because it's the right thing to do. And that's a broader part of the whole shift in strategy here. If you appeal to people's sense of rational economic calculus, they're always going to come up for an excuse not to act. You have to appeal to people's values. And it's values about what the right thing to do is, and it's also values about the kind of way people want to treat each other as citizens and work together socially. And so that's part of sort of the whole broader concept of social and political change that we really need to bring about.
I think too, like the older demographic, I think of my grandparents, they have just, like, it's interesting that you talk about this being a matter of faith. They have so much faith in technology as being like the way to solve, the saving grace. And it's almost like, you know, technology brought them to this place that they're living comfortably today. And so it just, for them to see a solution being like cutting back on some of the luxuries of life, like denying ourselves some of the material gains kind of seems like, I don't know, almost like a slap in the face. And so I think it's also like trying to work against that mentality as well, like arguing that technology isn't necessary. Like, I think it does have a part to play in creating energy, obviously, but it's not necessarily the end-all be-all either.
Yeah, but I actually think that we can make enormous progress without changing access to people's PVRs and iPods.
Yeah.
I don't know whether your grandparents are into that, but you know, you need to pay more for energy.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to necessarily transform the material lifestyles. I think it's actually possible that we may not be able to get as far as we need to and consume as much as we do, but most of the economic models that people do say it's not a significant problem with respect to that type of consumption.
Well, it's been a great dialogue for sure. This is what I like about this smaller sort of community. We get to ask a lot of questions, we get answers back. But I think we should probably move on to our next speaker because it's a little bit behind schedule. And yeah, thank you, Dr. Hoberg, for...
Thank you.